Henry VIII ruled England with absolute authority, a man whose decisions could shape the lives and deaths of thousands. Among the swirl of politics, power, and scandal, one woman briefly stepped into the center of the king's world, only to be almost completely erased from history. Her name was Bessie Blount, a daughter of minor nobility, a mistress to the king, and the mother of his only acknowledged illegitimate son, Henry FitzRoy. In the shadows of Tudor England's grand narrative, Bessie's story stands out not for her wealth or titles, but for how easily she was removed from the record. Bessie's life intersected with Henry's at a moment when the king was desperate for a male heir. The Tudor dynasty teetered on the edge of uncertainty. Queens came and went, alliances shifted, and the question of succession dominated every council meeting. Bessie's charm and intelligence caught the king's attention, and soon she became one of the most prominent women in his life, enough to give birth to a son, a potential heir who could have changed the course of England's future. Henry FitzRoy was not just a child. He was a symbol of possibility and political tension. The king recognized him officially, granting him prestigious titles, yet FitzRoy's existence also created unease in the court. Could this boy, born outside marriage, threaten the claims of queens and princes? Was Bessie herself a threat, a woman who held influence simply by giving birth to the king's son? The court buzzed with rumors, whispers of ambition, and unspoken fears. Every glance, every decision was loaded with consequence. Yet despite the significance of her role, Bessie Blount began to fade from official accounts. The king's obsession with power, combined with the precarious nature of her position, made her story vulnerable to erasure. Once FitzRoy died at 17, the threat he, and by extension Bessie, posed disappeared. The court moved on, queens and mistresses alike replaced her in memory, and Bessie was relegated to the footnotes of history. Her existence, once central to England's political drama, was quietly obscured. Bessie's story raises a striking question. How many voices in history were silenced not because they were unimportant, but because someone with power wanted the record rewritten? Her experience is a window into the ruthless nature of Tudor politics, where influence could be fleeting and remembrance even more fragile. If you think history remembers everyone who mattered, subscribe, because some truths were deliberately erased. The court of Henry VIII was a dazzling spectacle, but behind the glittering tapestries and golden chandeliers, every smile and bow hid a game of survival. Banquets overflowed with roasted meats, sweetmeats, and wines imported from across Europe, yet beneath the celebration simmered competition, jealousy, and fear. Courtiers whispered in shadowed corridors, trading secrets as easily as coins, each hoping to win favor with a king whose temper could swing from charm to fury in an instant. For women, the stakes were even higher. Beauty, grace, and intelligence were both currency and liability. A woman could rise to influence in a single morning, and fall into obscurity or disgrace by evening. Every glance from the king carried weight. Every word spoken in court could be twisted into offense or ambition. Survival required cunning, loyalty, and an unshakable awareness of the precarious balance between favor and danger. Among these women, Bessie Blount's position was uniquely perilous. Unlike the queens, who wielded formal authority, or the more seasoned mistresses, she was young, charismatic, and intelligent. Her influence stemmed not from rank but from her connection to Henry VIII himself. That connection bore fruit in the form of Henry FitzRoy, the king's only acknowledged illegitimate son. FitzRoy's birth catapulted Bessie into extraordinary prominence, but it also marked her as a target. The existence of a male child outside marriage was a political earthquake. In the Tudor court, where succession was everything, a single boy could destabilize alliances, threaten royal plans, and unsettle the ambitions of both queens and noble families. Bessie's influence was invisible yet formidable. Her beauty and demeanor allowed her to navigate the treacherous corridors of power, yet every advantage came with risk. She could charm the king, but that very charm drew envy and scrutiny from courtiers who feared the potential of her position. Political rivals watched closely, ready to exploit any misstep to discredit her. And above all, Henry VIII himself demanded control over the court, over the narrative, and ultimately over who would be remembered. The danger was not abstract. History shows that proximity to the king could be as deadly as it was rewarding. Mistresses could be elevated, married off, or pushed aside. Queens could be executed. Bessie's rise had been meteoric, but her fate was always uncertain, a delicate balance that required constant vigilance. Her story illuminates the fragility of influence in a world where power was personal, absolute, and often unforgiving. The political pressures were compounded by fear of rivals within the court, fear of the king's unpredictable whims, and fear of losing her son's future. FitzRoy's very existence placed Bessie in a complex web of intrigue. Supporters of the Tudor succession viewed him as a symbol of hope and threat in equal measure, while opponents regarded him as a dangerous anomaly. Any miscalculation, any rumor, could unravel everything. Even more striking is the erasure that followed. How does a woman who gave birth to a king's son vanish from history? Who decides which lives are remembered and which are erased? Bessie's story forces us to confront the brutal reality of Tudor power. Influence could be fleeting and memory could be controlled as easily as fate itself. In this world, Bessie navigated her role with intelligence and discretion, aware of every gaze, every whisper, and every potential betrayal. Her rise and precarious position in Henry VIII's court exemplify not only the political volatility of the era but the fragile nature of female influence in a patriarchal society that elevated and discarded women with equal ferocity. She held power, but power in Henry's England was never secure. It was a game of shadows, and survival depended on knowing which moves could save a life and which could erase it entirely. Henry FitzRoy's birth had promised a new chapter in Tudor history. The illegitimate son of Henry VIII was not only acknowledged by the king, but celebrated. FitzRoy was granted titles, becoming Duke of Richmond and Somerset, and courtiers treated him with a mixture of respect and cautious deference. His existence symbolized both hope and tension, a young male heir outside of marriage, a potential alternative to the fragile line of succession. For Bessie Blount, her son's rise solidified her influence. She was no longer just a mistress, she was the mother of a figure who could have altered England's political landscape. Yet the promise was short-lived. In 1536, at the age of 17, Henry FitzRoy died suddenly. The cause, likely tuberculosis, struck swiftly, leaving the Tudor court stunned. With his death, Bessie's influence evaporated almost overnight. The king's court, ever calculated and political, no longer needed to accommodate her. She had lost her leverage, the delicate position that had allowed her proximity to the most powerful man in England. Suddenly, her story became inconvenient, a reminder of ambitions and possibilities that no longer served the crown. The erasure began subtly. References to Bessie Blount in official records dwindled. Chroniclers and court historians, many under the influence of Henry VIII's directives, began to focus attention elsewhere. On queens, on new mistresses, on children whose futures aligned with the Tudor succession. Bessie's name receded from public memory, her role minimized, her legacy overshadowed by those who continued to occupy the king's favor. It was as if she had never mattered at all. A deliberate act of historical silence orchestrated by a court that valued control above truth. Court politics intensified the erasure. Alliances shifted with alarming speed. Those who had once supported Bessie, seeing potential in FitzRoy's claim, recalibrated their loyalties to align with the king's next obsession. Mistresses rose and fell, queens secured or lost power, and Bessie was quietly pushed out of every sphere of influence she had briefly occupied. Her accomplishments, bearing the king's son, navigating a treacherous court, surviving the perils of Henry VIII's temper, were left unacknowledged in the official narrative. History was rewritten around her absence. The psychological weight of such erasure cannot be underestimated. Bessie's story underscores a chilling truth about Tudor England. Influence could vanish as suddenly as it appeared, and remembrance could be dictated by those in power. Even women of intelligence, charm, and strategic acumen were vulnerable. FitzRoy's death not only ended Bessie's direct connection to political leverage but signaled a broader societal message. Women's agency, particularly in the shadows of male-dominated power, was conditional, fragile, and easily extinguished. The suspense in this narrative is not found in battles or rebellions, but in the quiet, systematic removal of a life from history. Every act of omission, the absence of her name in court records, the silence in chronicles, the lack of mention in political correspondence, was a calculated stroke. Bessie's story serves as a haunting illustration of how power shapes memory. Those who once seemed indispensable can vanish, leaving behind only whispers of what might have been. This is also a moment to reflect on FitzRoy himself. A young man of royal blood, celebrated in his short life, yet ultimately erased in the broader context of Tudor politics. His death marked the end of one possibility, and the beginning of another, the codification of power in Henry VIII's preferred narrative. The king, obsessed with legacy and control, ensured that history would remember the succession he wanted to be remembered, not the individuals who briefly challenged or complicated it. Bessie Blount's experience forces the audience to confront a deeper question. How many stories of power, resilience, and influence have been lost simply because they no longer serve those in charge? Her life, her brief triumph, and her ultimate erasure reveal the fragility of memory in a world governed by absolute authority. The court's manipulation of her story demonstrates that history is not always a record of events, but a reflection of who controlled the telling. Comment below, should Bessie Blount be remembered as a powerful figure in her own right, or just as a footnote in Henry's obsession with heirs? After the death of her son Henry FitzRoy, Bessie Blount receded from the intense scrutiny of Henry VIII's court. Freed from the direct pressures of courtly politics, she charted a quieter course. She married twice more, first to Gilbert Talboys, with whom she had 3 children, and later to Edward Clinton, creating a family life far removed from the perilous spotlight of Tudor intrigue. These marriages provided stability and a semblance of normalcy, but they could not fully restore the prominence she once held. Bessie's retreat from court illustrates a harsh truth. Influence in the Tudor world was never fully secure. Her proximity to the king had offered her a fleeting position of power, but that power was contingent entirely on Henry's favor and her son's existence. Once FitzRoy died, Bessie's political significance evaporated. The court, which had once accommodated her presence, now moved forward without acknowledging her contributions. In this way, her life reflects the fragile, conditional nature of influence for women in a society dominated by men and legacy. Her erasure from official records is particularly striking. Chroniclers and historians, often working under the subtle pressures of the monarchy, chose to overlook Bessie's role. While queens and favored courtiers were remembered in letters, portraits, and genealogies, Bessie became a shadow, acknowledged only briefly in passing. The deliberate omission underscores the extent of Henry VIII's control not just over events, but over memory itself. History in Tudor England was as much a tool of power as any army or law. Those whose stories were inconvenient could be quietly erased. Yet even in obscurity, Bessie demonstrated resilience. She raised her children, maintained her family's position in society, and navigated the complexities of life beyond the court's treacherous games. Though her influence was no longer political, she carved out a private space where she could exert agency, maintain dignity, and secure her family's future. This quieter form of power, one outside the public eye, contrasts sharply with the fleeting visibility she experienced as Henry VIII's mistress, revealing the diverse ways women negotiated survival and agency in a male-dominated world. Bessie's story offers a sobering reflection on the limits of power and the fragility of legacy. In a patriarchal society, Even those closest to kings and central to political events could be forgotten if their presence no longer served the dominant narrative. Her life forces modern audiences to consider how many voices have been silenced by those who control history, and how often societal memory has been shaped not by deeds or character, but by expedience and power. The consequences of her erasure extend beyond her own life. By being removed from records, Bessie's story is a lens through which we see the systemic marginalization of women throughout history. It highlights the dangers of a society where authority determines not only what happens, but what is remembered. And yet, the very act of uncovering her story today transforms her from a footnote into a figure of reflection and intrigue, allowing modern audiences to witness the challenges, strategies, and resilience of a woman whose life was shaped by forces far larger than herself. Bessie Blount's quiet resilience, her survival outside the glare of courtly politics, and the eventual rediscovery of her story speak to the enduring power of narrative. Even when memory is manipulated, truth has a way of resurfacing, if someone is willing to look, question, and remember. Her life teaches a subtle but profound lesson. Influence can be fleeting, but stories, once uncovered, can reclaim the recognition they were denied. If you want more hidden stories of history's forgotten figures, like and subscribe. These tales won't survive without you. The story of Bessie Blount is more than a historical account of a mistress and her illegitimate son. It is a lesson about the power of narrative and the fragility of memory. In Tudor England, Henry VIII not only controlled the kingdom but also the stories that would endure. He shaped which names would be celebrated, which deeds remembered, and which lives would quietly vanish from history. Bessie's erasure is a stark reminder that power is not only about wealth, armies, or authority, it is about controlling the narrative. This lesson resonates far beyond the court of Henry VIII. Even today, individuals and communities face similar erasures. Voices are silenced when they challenge dominant perspectives, when they threaten established hierarchies, or when others decide their stories are inconvenient. History, society, and even our own workplaces or communities can mirror the Tudor court. Those who once held influence or made significant contributions can be forgotten if someone else controls the record. Bessie's life prompts us to recognize that forgetting is rarely natural. It is often a deliberate act, reflecting who has the power to write the story. Yet within this erasure lies resilience. Bessie survived beyond the court, beyond the influence of Henry VIII, and beyond the selective memory of history. She built a family, raised children, and lived a life outside the glaring attention of politics. Even if official chronicles ignored her, her impact endured in her family, her children, and in the lessons her story now imparts to us. This quiet perseverance is a form of triumph, a testament to the human capacity to endure and persist even when the world refuses to acknowledge you. Her resilience invites viewers to reflect on the hidden strength present in lives that appear forgotten. Bessie's legacy challenges the notion that only those celebrated in history were significant. True influence is not measured solely by recognition, but by the courage, intelligence, and adaptability required to navigate forces beyond one's control. Her life reminds us that survival, dignity, and agency are victories in their own right, even if history initially refuses to notice. More importantly, Bessie's story encourages us to examine the narratives around us today. Who has been silenced in our communities, workplaces, or families, not because they lacked importance but because someone else controlled the story? How often do we overlook voices that were never intended to be heard, simply because they were inconvenient to prevailing systems? Reflecting on these questions allows us to reclaim forgotten histories, to amplify stories that were deliberately obscured, and to honor those whose contributions were overshadowed. In celebrating Bessie Blount, we celebrate the resilience of all who have been marginalized or erased. Her life shows that even when history seems to have forgotten you, your story can resurface, your influence can endure, and your experiences can teach those willing to listen. The lessons of Bessie's life are not only historical, they are timeless. Survival requires courage, memory requires advocacy and recognition often demands effort. Bessie Blount's journey is a call to action for viewers. Her erasure challenges us to confront the structures that silence voices, and her survival encourages us to seek out the forgotten, honor their resilience, and learn from their experiences. By examining history through the lens of those intentionally marginalized, we not only enrich our understanding of the past, but also illuminate the ongoing need to question who controls the stories we inherit, and whose stories are still waiting to be heard. Bessie Blount's story concludes not with grandeur or official recognition, but with quiet resilience. She survived the court's ruthless intrigues, raised her children, and carved out a life beyond the shadow of Henry VIII's obsession. Yet her near erasure from history reminds us that power does not only shape events, it shapes memory. Lives, achievements, and influence can vanish if someone else controls the narrative. Bessie's story has returned to us through careful reconstruction, but countless others remain hidden, waiting for the truth to be uncovered. Her life leaves us with a profound understanding of the forces that determine who is remembered and who is forgotten. It is a call to examine the structures of power around us, to question the stories that survive, and to honor the lives that history has attempted to silence. In celebrating Bessie, we reclaim her significance and recognize the resilience required to endure when recognition is denied. And the story doesn't end here. Next time, we uncover the mysterious fate of Mary Bullen, another woman caught in the web of Henry VIII's desires, ambitions, and obsession with heirs. Her tale, like Bessie's, reveals the human cost of power, the fragility of female influence, and the lengths to which history can be manipulated to serve the powerful. Subscribe now. If you leave, these forgotten truths vanish again just like Bessie Blount almost did. Don't let her story fade once more. Click subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us in uncovering the hidden histories of those who shaped, survived, and were silenced by the past. History is waiting, but only if you choose to remember.